Black Friday in 2003, one day after Thanksgiving. The fridge is full of leftovers. The house still smells like turkey. People are out shopping for the best deals of the year. And in a little suburb in New Jersey, rain is hammering the windows. Two teenage best friends are having a sleepover, and they make plans for a quick trip to the nail salon to get their nails done. And then it was back home. Simple. They didn't even need their prepaid cell phone, so it stays on their dresser. They grab their jackets, an umbrella, and they say, "We'll be right back." But later, when the streetlights blink on in a storm and hours pass, a mother starts to worry. She tells herself she's being dramatic, but as the rain falls, she tried to hold back tears. She knows that something is wrong, and she's right. Her 16-year-old daughter is missing and in danger. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you've never been here before, I am Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. Every week, I take you back in time to talk about each case that I cover, and taking you back makes me think of all the nostalgic things from my past, including things that I'm sure a lot of you remember from our childhood, traditions like watching cartoons on Saturday mornings and eating a big bowl of cereal in front of the TV. And as I got older, I didn't do either one of those anymore. I was too busy, but especially not the sugary cereal. That is until I tried Magic Spoon, the sponsor of today's video, and I've been sharing it with you ever since. It's cereal and it's crispy treats that actually fuel you. Their cereal has 13 to 14 grams of protein, 0 sugar, and only 4 to 5 grams of net carbs per serving. And the protein treats, they pack 11 to 12 grams of protein, only 1 gram of sugar, and 1 to 2 grams of net carbs. It's perfect when you're on the go and you need something that's quick, that isn't sticky or heavy like a protein bar. And here's the difference. When I eat a bowl of Magic Spoon, I don't need to keep going and eat 2 or 3 bowls the way I did with other cereal. It's actually filling, and because of the protein, I feel satisfied with just one serving. It satisfies my sweet tooth, and honestly, it ends up balancing out all of my mornings because I feel energized and full. And my favorite flavor is the cocoa flavor, but you'll find your favorite, and that's because they've got over 16 different flavors between the cereal and the protein treats, like cinnamon toast cereal or peanut butter cereal. It's nostalgic. It tastes like the cereals I grew up with, but with ingredients that make sense for me now as an adult. So no sugar crashes, no junk, just something simple, high protein, and delicious. And if you're still on the fence, Magic Spoon backs everything with a 100% happiness guarantee online. So if you don't love it, they'll refund you, no questions asked. And here's the deal. Just use my code Kimber or click the link in the description box to try Magic Spoon cereal or treats today and get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon on Amazon or at your nearest grocery store. And you can also scan the QR code on the screen and it'll take you straight there. It's like your childhood, but reinvented. And thank you so much to Magic Spoon for helping make this video possible. Now let's get back into the case for today. So let's go back and talk about that feeling. The one that you might try to shake off because you're making it sound ridiculous in your head, that something's wrong, and maybe it's not. Maybe you're being dramatic and you're being overprotective if you're a parent, let's say, and you're making what they say a mountain out of a molehill, right? Well, that is what Wilma Williams was feeling. She's at the front window of her house. She's watching the street like it might answer her if she stares long enough. Where's her daughter? She checks her daughter Sharita's room, and there's nothing there that's out of the ordinary. Her sheets are still made on the bed. No shoes kicked off under her desk. No damp umbrella by the door, meaning she didn't come home. The last she knew, Sharita said she was going to get her nails done, and she remembers the moment she was leaving. She said, "Be careful." And Sharita, almost in a sassy way, shrugged it off. She's like, "Mom, come on. I'm 16. No one's going to bother me." It was as if to say, I'm not a kid. I'm not going to get kidnapped. You know, I understand it has the word kid in it, but she's like, "I'm fine." And she walked out the door. Wilma knew the plan, or she thought she did. She thought that Sharita was going to spend Friday night over one of her best friend's house, Veronica Briggs. So that's where Wilma starts. Because by the time Saturday morning rolled around, Sharita wasn't answering her prepaid cell phone, and she wasn't back home. So she dials Veronica's number, and she's shocked when she finds out that Sharita had never gone back to Veronica's house that night. So her heart is pounding. She's like, what do you mean? She just assumed when Sharita didn't come home after the nail appointment at the beauty salon that she went over and spent the night at Veronica's, because that is what she had done so many times before in the past. And Wilma had been silencing that saying in her head where she was like, please say she stayed over, please say she stayed over. But knowing that she hadn't was horrifying because she didn't know where she was. Her stomach drops. It's the kind of feeling that a mom gets when they say they just know. Wilma calls her husband Harry. She tells him she's not home and she's not with Pinky. That was Veronica's nickname, and Sharita had one too. It was Rita, or Sunshine to her family. Harry didn't hesitate. He was already grabbing his keys and coming home. Now Wilma was trying to stay reasonable. She called the nail salon, but it was closed. So she calls another one of Sharita's friends, and then another, and no one had seen her. That's when she called the police, and she explained it. She's 16. She's never done this before. She doesn't have her phone on. The storm last night, everything. She should be home. The officer on the line gives her the worst kind of script. Maybe she ran away. We've heard it before. They can't take a report because it's too soon to do anything. Wilma hangs up and she stares at the phone. What is she supposed to do? You feel powerless. She and her husband decide they better go look for their daughter. So there's no use sitting around their house when their sunshine could be out there somewhere. And if you're wondering where this takes place, it's in Pennsauken, New Jersey. A row of narrow lawns, chain-link fences, and a line of cars parked along the curb on a street that points towards Philly's skyline. Blocks are tight and friendly, Cape Cod-style homes or brick ranchers with aluminum awnings and flower beds edged in red brick. Some streets sit low by the river, others towards Merchantville's tree-lined edges with tall old homes and deep porches, with Route 31 running right through it. Think diners, carpet stores, neon signs, a car lot with flags flapping in the wind. Down by the river road are warehouses and railroad tracks. Up by the parks, there's kids on chalk hopscotches and sidewalks. After school, it's bikes to the park, rollerblades on smooth sidewalks, or Nintendo. And it gets all the seasons. Fall, when leaves pile up in gutters. Winter, when they get the nor'easters, the rainy, slushy streets, the salt-crusted cars, and you see your breath under the amber glow of the streetlights. When this case took place, it was right between fall and winter. Sharita grew up in a yellow 2-story townhouse on the corner of Gross and Camden Avenue in the late 80s, early 90s, a house that never stayed quiet for long. Sharita Marguerite Williams was one of 3 children. She was born on October 1st of 1987 between her older sister Sabrina, who was 3 years older, and her younger brother John Henry, who came 4 years after Sharita. And she was an adorable little baby, the cutest. And as you can imagine, with 3 kids, the Williams household had a bunch of energy. The house was loud in the way that families hope for. Sharita's father, Harry, spent his days and sometimes his nights at Riverfront State Prison in Camden as a corrections officer. Camden was close enough to see from Pennsauken, but it was not the best area. It had been buckling for years with poverty and high crime. Harry's work there pressed a lesson into his parenting: discipline, personal responsibility, respect for yourself and others. It wasn't just talk. You could feel those values at the dinner table. He would teach his children when to apologize, and it had to be real. When you spoke up, you looked someone in the eye. And Harry and Wilma were good parents. They were loving, kind, and they've raised well-mannered, respectful children. Wilma set the rhythm of the entire household. The schedules, the check-ins, the kindness that makes you feel like she cared instead of she was trying to control you. Together, they gave their kids what they wanted the most: a safe town, close schools, familiar neighbors, and a childhood that happened outside as much as possible. Pennsauken had a small-town feel. You truly knew your neighbors, and they were glad they lived in that neighborhood because there were a lot of other families there with a lot of kids. You could play on the street, on the block together, and it was almost as though your neighbors would watch out for your kids and vice versa. It was very family-friendly. No one worried if their kids were outside playing in the street. Streetlights were a clock. That's when you ended your game of tag. The bikes would be moved in clusters, sidewalks were chalk-stained, screen doors would open, and parents leaned out of them to call you home. I remember those days. The front door could be left unlocked during the day. This is where Sharita grew up. In that world, Sharita stood out early. She was the kid who could be outspoken when it counted and soft when it mattered. The go-to sibling for backup in an argument and the one who would sit beside you on a bad day until you felt better. They called her Sunshine for a reason. It wasn't because she was always happy, but because she carried a warmth about her that made other people feel good. She had that quiet confidence. She wasn't loud or showy. It's the kind that made people listen when she had something to say. Sharita, a really cute little girl, grew into a stunning young woman. Flawless skin, beautiful complexion, big bright smile. And there was a reason for that. As she got into high school, she liked little rituals. That's how I'll say it. It was about respecting herself, caring about her appearance. She wanted to look her best. Eyebrows perfectly waxed, outfits chosen with intention, even if she was just heading to school or staying in. She loved getting her hair done and her nails all the time, and her favorite salon was only 3 minutes away, the Hollywood Beauty Salon. It wasn't just vanity. This was Sharita carrying herself with grace. And of course, it was also her being a teenager because honestly, there wasn't much to do sometimes, so the girls would pamper themselves, and there's no harm in that. Teachers noticed that Sharita was polite, well-mannered, engaged, and the student who arrived in first period awake when everyone else was half asleep. Sharita was selected for the Teacher's Choice Award. She made that big of an impression on her teachers. Sharita loved to laugh, and she also enjoyed reruns of I Love Lucy, and she enjoyed SpongeBob SquarePants. She didn't need much to make her happy. She liked hanging out on the couch, and she did like to enjoy TV with someone else. She was very social, but she did have her best friends, Veronica Briggs, Ashley Mendez, and Ariel Norton. They liked sleepovers, going to the mall, and talking on the phone for hours. You gotta love the 90s nostalgia. And then church kept Sharita anchored and grounded. At Ashbury United Methodist Church, she was in the youth group. This wasn't just an activity, it was part of her community. And on the weekends, she babysat for families and friends. Kids absolutely adored her because she was fun, but she was also very nurturing. She was kind of like a big sister. Parents trusted her because she acted like someone older than she was, and that's the wisdom that comes from having older siblings and also being an older sibling. Underneath it all was a creative eye. Sharita loved photography. She loved capturing those small, everyday moments, a sibling's almost smile, the rain on a bus window, the moment right before a joke makes somebody laugh. And she collected those memories in pictures. But that was just a hobby. When it came to what mattered to her in all seriousness, she had her heart set on something bigger, social work. She wanted to help people for a living because in practice, she was already doing it. She was showing up, listening, caring for those around her. And by her junior year at Pennsauken High School, Sharita had started researching colleges. She wasn't drifting through high school. She was building towards a future that fit who she was, bright, present, and service-minded. She was a friend they would call for last-minute plans, knowing that she would show up, no questions asked. Now, she did have a cell phone, albeit it was one of those ones with the prepaid minutes, but she would call if she was running late. This is the girl at the center of this story. And by November 29th of 2003, she had just turned 16 a few weeks ago. So barely over 15 when she just vanished. She had just celebrated Thanksgiving as a family. And the next day, while still on fall break, Sharita got bored sitting around the house. She told her mom that afternoon she was going to brave the storm, picked up her umbrella, and said, "I'm meeting up with Pinky." That was Veronica. "And we're going to Hollywood Salon to get our nails done. I'll be back later." This did not raise any red flags in Wilma's mind. It was completely normal. She should only be there maybe a couple hours. When Sharita didn't show back up later that evening, Wilma still wasn't worried. Again, completely normal. She probably decided to walk to Veronica's and spend the night there. Now, to be clear, Sharita wasn't the type of teenager that took risks. She didn't hang out with a dangerous crowd. She didn't get into trouble. But when Saturday morning came and she hadn't even let her parents know that she was okay, that's when things shifted. And this is where I left off. A frantic mother that realized that something isn't right and wonders, how long has her daughter really been gone? And this was because Veronica told her, "Yeah, we got our nails done, but we went our separate ways afterward." And that was hours ago, late into Friday evening when it was already dark outside. The walk home from the salon is about 15 minutes, and it was raining and cold outside, so where else would she have gone? Wilma checked her room, and that's when she realized Sharita left her cell phone on the dresser. When she picked it up, Wilma could see it had run out of minutes. And if you are younger, some phones were under contracts where every month you would get a certain amount of minutes that you could use. And if you didn't, they would sort of roll over to the next month. So you could kind of build up your minutes to talk to your friends and whatnot. There were times of the night when calls were free and didn't use your minutes. But let's say you weren't 18, you were even younger, or you couldn't afford to have a contract on your phone. You could buy cards from places like Walmart or the gas stations, and they would literally have minutes on them. It was like a prepaid card. And you would also get a special prepaid cell phone, okay, that had no contract. And you would buy the cards, and you would actually put those minutes on your phone. But when you ran out, your phone was useless until you bought another one of those cards. So you would not be able to use your phone. So there was Sharita's cell phone left behind. Now, her mom knew that if she had no minutes, there wouldn't be any point in her bringing her phone. So, okay, fine. But here's what was unusual. To Wilma, this meant that Sharita planned to come back home, because if she was going to go anywhere else, she would have asked Wilma to borrow her phone that had a contract on it that wouldn't run out of minutes. That was something she did all the time when she was going to be out later. So now that was concerning. She did take her umbrella, her jacket, her purse, and her wallet, all the things she would have needed for a quick appointment to get her nails done. Wilma had a horrible stomach pain. Talk about a gut feeling. She was physically ill. She and her husband decide they're going to drive around the neighborhood. Now it's still early, around 8:30 in the morning, and they're making their rounds around familiar streets. But after a while, it doesn't do any good. They go back home and they make more calls. One was to Ashley Mendez, one of Sharita's best friends, and by now she realized that this was serious. So that's when Ashley admitted to something. Now, best friends don't usually tell their besties secrets, but Ashley knew that she had to do the right thing and tell Wilma that Sharita had been hiding something. She had a boyfriend. Now, the thing is, her mom knew that her daughter talked to boys because they would call the house and she would be on the phone giggling and carrying on, but she wasn't exactly allowed to full-on date. So this was news to her mother. So much so she almost didn't believe Ashley, but she does get the guy's name, Greg. Ashley said, I've never met him, but he lives out in Camden. He's a little bit older and Sharita has the biggest crush on him. So she goes to see him over his place and they've been hanging out. But the thing that Sharita would do is she would say she was at a friend's house. I think it's a common little lie that teenagers would tell, and it didn't seem like that big of a deal until now. Ashley knew that he lived across the 36th Street Bridge because there were times when Sharita admitted to her she was scared to cross it, especially at night when it was dark. The fact that Sharita's mom was hearing that her daughter even crossed this bridge alone at night was concerning because this was not a good part of town. This was a bridge over railroad tracks that led into Camden, the same town where Sharita's dad worked. And I mentioned it being full of crime and poverty. Ashley told Wilma that Sharita would say it's really scary, but she would brave it to get to Greg's house. And I'm thinking, why doesn't the boyfriend come to her? Why is he making her walk at night to him? And by the way, if this at all sounds familiar, the bridge over the railroad tracks, that's because I recently did a case about college students, and one of them did use a bridge to cross over railroad tracks in the middle of the night. So if you're having deja vu, you're not wrong. If you haven't watched that yet, I will link it above and below in the description box, but don't go now. Save that for right after this. Now, Wilma and Harry are tracking down this Greg person's address. It doesn't take long because Harry has some connections in law enforcement, and he's able to find out where this house is located in Camden. Now, let's say she walked from the beauty salon or her home to the bridge. That would be a 30-minute walk alone, just to paint a picture of what this area looked like. There is a lot of graffiti underneath the bridge. This is the kind of place where people would go to do drugs, drink alcohol, sleep if they didn't have a home. Definitely not a safe place for a teenager to be walking at night. So, of course, her parents are very concerned at this point. And Harry and Wilma decide they're going to go split up. Wilma takes one car, Harry takes another, and he calls his sister Patricia, and they go off to Greg's house while Wilma decides to take a trip to the bridge. She'll later say that this was intuition, but of course, we know that Ashley also mentioned it, but she just had a feeling she should go check that out. So let's start with Harry and Patricia. They go to Greg's house. His mom answers the door and she admits, yes, her son and Sharita had been hanging out recently. And yes, Sharita had come there the night before. But She left after Greg's mom said he wasn't available to see her. His mom said he needed to get his rest. He had been working all day with his dad, and then he had to do a shift at his job at 11 p.m. So between those times, his mom wanted him to just stay in bed, not hang out with Sharita. So she turned her away. She didn't even come inside, according to Greg's mother. Now, that's even more concerning to Harry. That meant Sharita left even later at night and attempted to walk home. That's about at least an hour alone in the dark in a bad area. It's just so disappointing because parents will feel like, wow, why couldn't my child let me know? I wouldn't have gotten mad because they did not want her seriously dating, sure, but knowing that she was all alone out there, somebody would have given her a ride. That's really worrisome. And I know teenagers always think like, oh, they're not going to understand. I'm going to get in trouble. But thinking about her walking along this route, it was really, really horrifying to think about. It probably wouldn't have been such a big deal if she wasn't missing at this point. Harry tells Greg's mom, Sharita's missing. And he's sort of waiting for her to get concerned, but she doesn't. She doesn't even flinch. She's like, teens will be teens. You know what I mean? Like, this is normal. They're probably just out. They don't want you to know where they are. But that's not Sharita. So now let's get to what Wilma was doing. It's around 10 a.m. and she gets to the 36th Street Bridge. She's driving over it. She slows down and she doesn't see anything that catches her eye at all. She makes sure she's looking on both sides and there's no sign of Sharita or her belongings. And I mean, she didn't even know what she was looking for. She was just looking for something to piece together this puzzle. Anything that's out of place, a dropped umbrella, maybe a charm that matches jewelry her daughter was wearing, a shoe in the gutter. But she sees nothing. From the driver's seat, everything about this bridge looks normal. The stone, the shrubs on the side, the tracks from the freight train. She sits there for a moment or two longer, but she thinks to herself, if there was something wrong here, I would see it and I would know. Both Wilma and her husband and his sister are rechecking every path. They're going down Camden side streets. They're scanning doorways, bus shelters. They stop at a payphone off of 32nd Street, the one that kids will still use when their minutes run out. But there's nothing. The family makes their way back home. But when a family member is missing, you can feel it. Wilma calls her other children down. They meet together. They talk about the last time they've heard or seen Sharita. No one has for at least a day. Wilma tries the salon again, and this time someone says, of course we know Sharita. She was in there all the time. The last time they saw her was around 6 p.m. She was leaving the salon in the rain with a friend. It wasn't really a lead, but it was another piece of the timeline. But then what happened next? Was this when she walked the 30 minutes to the bridge and then the extra 15 to Greg's? Because that would mean it would be close to 7 p.m. and definitely after dark. They know she made it to Greg's according to his mother, so did she backtrack home right away? They don't know. Harry swings by the school lot, even though it makes no sense to be there, but sometimes just seeing places where your child belongs and it reminds you of them is where you go because you have nowhere else to look. Meanwhile, Wilma felt something was pulling her to check the bridge again. This time, she gets in her car, Harry and his again with his sister Patricia, and they both go their separate ways to retrace Sharita's path from the salon to where the bridge was to Greg's house again. Now, Wilma gets to the bridge. It's close to 2 p.m. at this point. The rain has stopped, and she can see better. She decides this time she's going to park her car and get out. Once she's on top, she pulls over. She walks to one side. She peers over towards the gravel road, and there's a drop below the bridge to the embankment, and something catches her eye. There is a shape near the slope underneath the bridge. You know the place where you can kind of see underneath and sometimes catch a glimpse of someone asleep over there, like maybe when it's raining out? That was what Wilma was seeing, and she wondered what it was. It looked like a person, and she's squinting, and she's like, it's a man. Maybe a drug addict without a home, sleeping right under the bridge to take cover during the rain. Or worse, maybe he wasn't alive. Is he breathing? She can't tell. She's like, oh God, I don't see any movement. He doesn't have a jacket on. It's way too cold. So she tells herself she needs to call 911 because this poor man, at least it isn't her daughter, but her daughter crossed that bridge, a bridge with a possible dead man underneath it. So there were so many thoughts going through her mind. At 2:15, with her hands shaking, she dials 911, now for the second time that day, this time to report a possible dead body. Wilma waits, and when the dispatcher comes on, She said, listen, I'm over here at the 36th Street Bridge and my daughter's missing and I'm looking under the bridge because she walked here last night and there's a dead body under there. It's not her, but I'm looking for my daughter. You know what she's probably thinking. Here's this man, deceased in a place where her daughter was terrified to go, and to think she was near this area. It was too much. She thought about the type of people that Sharita could have encountered there, and she believed the dead man was probably a transient individual that had succumbed to the elements or suffered a drug overdose. Just hours after Wilma called the police to report her daughter missing, she stumbled upon a dead body. I'm sure that this was very traumatizing. After she was done talking to the dispatcher, she hung up and she immediately called her husband and told him what was going on. As a corrections officer, someone that wears a badge and works with law enforcement, Harry hurries to that bridge. Everyone is in shock, as you can possibly imagine. These parents are looking for their daughter, and now they're dealing with this. When Harry and Patricia arrive, the area is completely blocked off with crime scene tape. All Harry wants to know is where is his wife and what is going on. But unlike his wife, his mind goes straight to, I want to see who's under this bridge. I want to know that it's not my daughter. But they will not let him get close. Of course not, because this might be a crime scene. They tell him, sir, you got to get back. They don't want to risk evidence being contaminated. They don't know who this man is. He's trying to explain, my daughter's missing. But it doesn't matter. He can't go under that yellow tape. Homicide Detective Bill Wheeler is actually just in the middle of a shift change when he gets a call. And this man has already worked all night long, but he doesn't bother to go home because he knows he is going to need to race to get to the scene where they found a dead man's body. Wilma had indeed found someone who was deceased. When Detective Wheeler gets there, he's taking it all in. He's looking underneath the bridge. There's trash, all kinds of food wrappers around, graffiti on the walls, litter all over the place, debris, but there's also cigarette butts, and we know we can get DNA from that. It's just like a dumping ground. But when he comes up to check on the deceased, he can tell right away this is no accident, and it doesn't look like a man at all. It was a female, a young female, possibly 18. So wait, that changes everything. I'm like, what do they mean? Wilma said it was a man. But it was the shock and the trauma of the entire situation. It had actually blocked her brain from receiving what she was seeing. And I know that some of you are not going to believe this, or maybe you're skeptical. But let me tell you, I've read about this at least 2 times before. I was researching the Idaho case where the 4 college students were murdered by Brian Koberger. Many of you have been following that case and you know a lot of the details. Well, a lot of people were confused. They kept saying, why didn't the roommates know that there was blood all over the place over their roommate's body? And it made me think to a very similar case in Florida where I'm from. It was in Gainesville. It was the college murders. Danny Rolling was the killer. And it's the true story behind the Scream movies. Well, in the first case in Gainesville, many years ago, the roommate that was in that case actually heard something. She went to the bathroom, then she looked into her roommate's bedroom. And if we were to really look at what happened there, you would see blood covering everything, smears on the wall, pools on the floor. But she didn't. She had been drinking that night, like many college students do, even the ones in the Idaho case. And this woman thought it was vomit. She thought that her roommate had gotten sick, and she thought that's what she saw on the floor. She didn't know it was blood until paramedics got there and they were sick to their stomach from what they saw, and that's when a light bulb went off and everything clicked, and she saw the blood. So if you are wondering, our brain does protect us in high stress situations, and that seemed like what happened in Wilma's case, because this was clearly a young woman that matched Sharita's description down to what she was wearing when she was last seen. Jeans, a button-down black long-sleeve shirt, and a jacket. The jacket wasn't on her, but the shirt was, and it was open, exposing her chest, and her jeans were unbuttoned. This young woman was lying on her back, her feet facing towards the bottom of the slope. So you can probably picture what this overpass looks like. A lot of times they are cement, but back then, this one was still dirt. And there were these wooden slabs, if you're watching, I'm going to show them. They're kind of inside, embedded in the dirt, so you could use them to climb up towards the top of the slope, underneath the overpass. Investigators believe they have actually found Sharita Williams' body. So they are signaling to her Aunt Patricia while her father is kind of like off to the side. And they're looking at the aunt and saying like, get him out of here. Now they didn't specifically say anything. They just were like, take him home. So she did. They were just waiting around not knowing what was going on back home, their daughter still missing. But Harry knew when he was at the scene that it was too much of a coincidence. He thought it was Sharita, even if he held it in. Sergeant Martin Wolfe joins Detective Wheeler at the scene. They took a closer look at the deceased woman, trying to make sense of how she ended up there. As I explained, she was partially clothed, just her top was open, but her pants were on, just unbuttoned. She was not wearing her shoes or her jacket, but they were both nearby and muddy. As Sergeant Martin lifted her shirt, he noticed that the skin on her waist had marks on it on both sides. And as he pushed her jeans down just a little bit by the band, there were more of these marks. They were almost like a rug burn, but in tiny lines, and he realized this was from her underwear being pulled off of her in a struggle. It left indentation marks on her skin, and she was not wearing underwear. So now they think that she had been redressed, so to speak, and that her jeans were put back on. They look around, and they do find a pair of black, stretched out, and ripped underwear at the scene right near the overpass, only a few feet away from her body. Now they suspect that she had been violated, and that could be the motive. Next, they look at what is around her neck. It's some kind of cloth wrapped tightly around several times, and as they examine it, they determine that it is a black do-rag. This is a head covering usually worn by men. It can be worn by women, but this appeared to have been used as a ligature to cut off her airway. And it did not look like it belonged to Sharita, so they suspected it was the killer's. The most shocking find for detectives was actually what was inside of her mouth. Not one, but 2 plastic shopping bags had been crumpled up and then stuffed inside. None of these officers on scene had ever seen something like this before. It was very brutal. When removed, it was noted that they had a logo and name of a sporting goods store, Modell's. Now, interestingly, crime scene technicians that had been bagging potential evidence had called out a receipt that had looked kind of newer than the litter in that area. So they set that receipt aside, and detectives took a look at it after seeing the shopping bags, and sure enough, that receipt was from the exact same store that the bags were from, Modell's. The item purchased was a black, large-size jumbo t-shirt, and the time listed on the receipt was 4:28 p.m., and the date was Friday, November 28th, the very same day that Sharita walked out of her parents' house to go get her nails done. There were no other visible injuries, no gunshot wounds, no stab marks, no blunt force trauma that they could see. So it was time to have the body transported to the medical examiner's office for an official identification and autopsy. But they don't even think they need a medical examiner to tell them that the body is 16-year-old Sharita Williams because a black purse and a zebra print wallet were found on the scene. And inside was a driver's license with Sharita's name, address, and picture on it. So they are 99% sure this is Sharita. Once at the morgue, they do take a picture of Sharita's face, and then they go to Wilma and Harry to present that to them. Can you imagine that is what you're shown? It was around 5:30 p.m. The detectives knocked on the door, and they don't even hesitate. They hand the picture of Sharita from the morgue. They show them the identification they found. So whatever hope was left in that house fell apart. They both cry out. Harry doesn't understand how someone could kill his little girl. For what? What did she do to deserve this? And Wilma is a wreck. Someone took away her sunshine, her pride and joy. It was unbearable. Wilma's knees gave out. She is on the ground wailing. The detectives promise, we're going to find this person. We're going to find the person who did this to her. They already had their suspicions about what kind of person could have done this. And what I mean by that is they thought it was probably a male, that they were strong, physically fit, able to attack and restrain her, overpower Sharita. But it could also be someone on substances, because substances can make them go into a frenzy. The location of the crime is why they were thinking that way. The items of clothing also told a story about the struggle. The back of Sharita's jeans were muddy on the rear end, showing she was most likely scooting or being dragged across the floor as she was trying to get away. There was dirt all over her jacket. Her shirt was pulled open by force. Her shoes had been removed and thrown nearby. Her purse was ripped off and rummaged through. And there was that makeshift ligature that the killer probably took off of his own head while over top of her. And of course, the bags shoved into her mouth to keep her from screaming. It was devastating. This was horrific. They also noted that her hands were tied around her back, and it was her own jacket belt that was used to restrain her. While the autopsy is being completed, the investigators are going back through all the evidence, and the receipt was very important. There was a cashier's name on the receipt, Mia, and they had the address of the Modell's location plus the time that the transaction took place. So their first step was to go get CCTV footage, thinking they're going to be able to see the man who bought these items or this item, and this would have been a huge lead. Maybe they could take that photo to the media, put it out to the public, and someone would recognize this man. Or even maybe the cashier, or possibly other people that worked there because maybe this was a regular and somebody would recognize him. Unfortunately, not only was the CCTV system not working, but remember, this was Black Friday. That's when this transaction occurred. The cashier had to be honest with detectives, and she said there were so many people that came through here that day. There is no way I would be able to remember this specific customer. This was a dead end, and it could have been so promising. And sometimes you have to think about the fact that these businesses, they don't keep up with their security cameras. They're supposed to be preventing stolen inventory, but sometimes in cases like this, you're relying on this camera system to work so you can possibly find a killer. So it just blows my mind that places don't keep their security system working and in good condition. So then they thought maybe we could track this person down by their bank account information, but the transaction was in cash, so another dead end. The medical examiner was also at a dead end, so to speak, because they were not able to determine the cause of Sharita's death. Days had gone by. It was now December 1st, and the family and even the investigators were still waiting for cause and manner of death. Even though to us it may seem like this is obvious, it's a homicide. They have to wait for toxicology. And I know this can be very frustrating, especially for the family, but what they're probably thinking is, we know that she doesn't take substances, she doesn't drink alcohol in excess. What does that have to do with what happened to her? But the reason why is because investigators have to rule everything out. They have to make sure that maybe she didn't pass out or OD, and then someone else came along and took advantage of her. They have to know. Now, by this point, the investigators had actually spoken to the guy that Sharita was seeing, Greg. And when she was unable to speak to him that night, she called him from a nearby payphone, the one that her dad drove by and looked at because he knew that people probably used it and he knew his daughter didn't have her phone. His house was only a few yards away from the 36th Street Bridge, so now they have more information on her movements, and this payphone was in the same vicinity, just a couple blocks away. Now remember, she did not have her phone with her. Her minutes ran out. Of course, because they didn't have any concrete answers, the media was speculating. They were speculating about the toxicology report since it had been mentioned. Wilma had to tell reporters she knew her daughter wasn't under that bridge by her own accord. She wasn't under there mingling and doing substances. That wasn't her. So if that's what they were insinuating, it didn't happen that way. Word of Sharita's murder spread quickly through Pennsauken, and the town was shaken to its core. Fear was settling all over this community, especially among parents and teenagers. For many, it was the first time they realized that something like this could happen here to someone they actually knew. At Pennsauken High School, extra counselors were brought in so they could help students and staff process what was happening. And that Monday morning, the school held a moment of silence in Sharita's honor. Classmates showed up. They were wearing t-shirts with her photo printed across the front. And in one hallway, a sign was hung that read, "In loving memory of Rita," surrounded by pictures, many of which Sharita had taken in her photography class. Her history teacher shared that she was always on time, completely engaged, always upbeat, ready to learn, even when the rest of the room was half asleep. At the end of the school year, each teacher gave out special awards to a student who left a mark on them, and Sharita had already been chosen to receive his, the Teacher's Choice Award. But now, she would never get that chance. This teacher, Mr. Shear, said Sharita was an A.B. student who had just completed a PowerPoint presentation about the tragedy on 9/11 with descriptions and special graphics that she created. He said she was the type of student you can never forget. And for Sharita's friends, the grief was unbearable. But so was the desire to do something, so they began collecting donations in containers at local businesses to help her family cover her funeral expenses. Over 100 friends and family members had donated. Carl Miller Funeral Home in Camden would be where her services were held. But everything was on pause, since they were still waiting for that toxicology report and her death certificate signed by the medical examiner. And eventually her body was released. And by Saturday, December 6th, she was laid to rest in a white dress at the World Harvest Christian Center with a veil covering her face. And 200 people came to say their last goodbyes. Of course, there were many tears and prayers and hugs and heartbreak. A lot of friends and classmates had shared stories about her, but others didn't even have the words. Even though her remains had been released, her cause of death had not been confirmed. So her family had to bury her without any answers, and she was finally laid to rest at Lakeview Memorial Park in New Jersey. Sharita's father, Harry, struggled. I mean, her mom did too. But as a correctional officer, he wore a badge and uniform every single day, which he found were symbols of authority and protection. But no badge could bring back his daughter, and no uniform could shield him from the pain he was feeling because he felt like he had failed the one person who needed him the most. He said that he had made it his duty to serve and protect, but he couldn't protect his own child, and that haunted him. The entire Williams family was devastated, and it wasn't until the end of January, 2 months after Sharita was found, that the toxicology and autopsy reports were completed. There were no traces of drugs or alcohol or any other substances in Sharita's system. And of course, this brought some closure for her family, because you know now that your daughter didn't die a certain way and they weren't doing certain things, because that was still lingering in their mind, like, what if? So now they have a sense of peace. However, when they found out the pure brutality that happened to her, it was unbelievable. The cause of death was suffocation. The plastic bags had been so far down her airway, she slowly suffocated to death, unable to breathe. And to even think about the last moments that someone is suffering like that is sickening. They believe that the killer had restrained her hands behind her back with her own jacket strap. The belt around her jacket was tied around her hands, and then he used his own head covering that he took off and wrapped it around her neck to gain control of her. And once she was possibly unconscious or restrained enough that she wasn't able to move or try to get away, he violated her by pulling down her jeans just enough and ripping off her underwear, and then he stuffed the plastic bags down her throat so she was no longer breathing. There was no DNA found inside of her body. Therefore, they did not have a lead as to who her killer was. Now, they suspected, as I had mentioned, that this was probably a male perpetrator, physically larger than her and stronger. But even though the medical examiner had not confirmed that in the beginning, the investigators on this case had already treated it like a homicide. So they were looking at clues, they were examining the crime scene, they were requesting analysis of certain pieces of evidence, including her clothing. So they were now awaiting confirmation about whether there was any biological material on those items. Meanwhile, they decided to go to Hollywood Beauty Salon, where Sharita was getting her nails done. And luckily, their CCTV footage was available and their cameras were working. They went frame by frame. You can see her in this still frame right here. It isn't great quality, but there she is. She's got her jeans on, she's got a black belt. It was the type with little metal ringlets around it. She's got on her black blouse with a collar, and she's holding her black jacket in her arms as she's walking out of the salon. When she walked out that door, they were able to determine that she was walking in the direction of the 36th Street Bridge towards Greg's house. He lived 2 blocks away. So once she was on the other side and she arrived, she would have been there around 6:30. After his mom told her he wasn't available, that's when she walked to the nearby payphone, where she called him for the next 10 to 15 minutes back to back. About every 3 minutes, she would try his cell phone again and again until he finally picked up. She called him 16 times. And you can understand and picture a teenager. She's upset. She came all that way. It had been raining. It's cold. She's all alone. She probably thought they were going to hang out. Her and Greg had a very short conversation. He said that he needed to turn off his phone so that he could get some rest. And that was the last time he talked to her. So this puts her in that area around 7 p.m. They pull up Greg's phone records, and they kind of have a theory for a moment because they have to go through everything, right? He said that that was the last thing he did. He turned his phone off and he went to bed, but they noticed he'd been speaking to someone else that night. They found out what the number was, and it was another female. So when he hung up with Sharita, he was calling someone else. So now they're going with this whole love triangle theory. It was explored, but I'm just going to let you know, we're not going to go there. Nothing ever came of it. They even started looking at Sharita's friends. And that was because of the fact that Ashley mentioned the bridge. Remember, she was like, oh, Sharita was really scared going over that bridge. Well, that was only because she knew that her boyfriend Greg lived over there. It wasn't because she knew any kind of information that led to where her murder occurred. But they wanted to make sure her friends were not involved in any way. They were all shocked that investigators would even think that they had something to do with their friend's murder. But everyone had to be ruled out and everything had to be explored because right now, they didn't have any physical leads connecting anyone to this crime. They looked into Greg, they looked into Greg's mother, they looked into the other girls that Greg had been talking to. They went down every angle possible to try to find out if someone wanted to harm her because maybe they were mad at her, maybe they were jealous, but none of that added up to the violation aspect of this case. However, somebody could have staged it to look like a violation because remember, there wasn't any semen found inside of her body. So these were just theories and assumptions that they had to go on. It was a waiting game. And by the next year, months later, there were still no answers. After Sharita's death, neither Wilma nor Harry returned to work. Harry was overwhelmed with grief. He was under doctor's care, and they'd even tried counseling because there were wounds that they felt would not heal on their own. On certain days, Harry found himself at a nonprofit where he was helping, and it was called Stop and Drop Your Gun. They talked to kids the way that he wished somebody would have talked to the person who did this to his daughter. It was a program that helped young people give up weapons before it was too late. And of course, his surviving children gave Harry a purpose. He had to protect his 19-year-old daughter, Sabrina, especially when you don't know if your family is being targeted and if someone was going to hurt another one of your children. They kept Sharita's room exactly as it was when she disappeared. She had a necklace that had an S, and it came back and was given to Wilma after she was taken to the morgue. She said she never took it off. Everything else, her jacket, her jeans, the pieces that might hold answers, were in custody with the people who had to look at them clinically to solve this case. Just months after Sharita's murder in June of 2004, her family and hundreds of supporters gathered on the 36th Street Bridge, and they marched several blocks in her honor, holding banners, wearing shirts with Sharita's face, and chanting, "No justice, no peace, we want justice." Sharita's uncle George Thomas spoke during the rally. He told the crowd he felt detectives were not doing everything they could to find Sharita's killer. But they were waiting on science. That's what they were doing. They were working hard, but they only had so much they could go on. And finally, a stain that was swabbed on one of Sharita's pant legs of her jeans did yield a full male DNA profile. And that was uploaded to CODIS, the National DNA Database. And detectives hoped that it would have a hit on a known offender. However, the results came back the same way that all the other leads did. No match. The offender was not in the registry. It was either a first-time offender or he hadn't been caught yet for other crimes. That was the worst kind of news because you're like, wow, this is going to be such a breakthrough. We're now going to know who did this to her. That didn't happen. However, they did know that an attack happened. Semen was on her jeans. This is a violation. It's a male, but they just don't know who. Now, it was tested against the guy she'd been seeing, other male individuals in her circle, but there were no matches. Now, in the fall of 2004, Wilma Williams appeared on the Montel Williams show alongside a psychic named Sylvia Brown. It was national spotlight, but many viewers were left having mixed feelings about Sharita's mom being in contact with a psychic. For Wilma, all this was another attempt to bring Sharita's name into the public eye, another way to keep pressure on detectives. But I do understand, because we have mentioned and talked about psychics on this channel. And there usually are mixed feelings about that. But when you are desperate, sometimes I think families are like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Sure, maybe I don't believe in psychics, but what if they somehow give them a lead? I think I would do it. If I was a desperate parent, I don't really see the harm in it, but I understand how it can look from the outside. When what would have been Sharita's 17th birthday arrived, they went to her grave and they released white balloons into the sky. And on the first anniversary of her murder, candles lined the sidewalk and the bridge where she was found. 60 people stood there together, and they said her name out loud because saying it felt like a small form of justice. And at home every Monday, Harry called the detectives, a supervisor, anyone related to the case. He was polite until polite wasn't working anymore, and then he was persistent in a way that would get him a response. He told them, I'm not going to let you forget about her. It was like a broken record. And another year passed. It was now 2005. And in the spring, police increased the reward for information to $5,000, hoping that it might bring someone forward. But no one came. Back at home, the Williams family created a memorial shrine in the center of their dining room. It held mementos, candles, and framed photos of Sharita. For years, this case went silent. The trail had gone completely cold. But behind the scenes, detectives were never really giving up on the case, and neither was her family. Finally, in 2007, 4 years after Sharita's murder, there was a hit in CODIS on the DNA from her genes. They now had a name. A 21-year-old man who had been arrested on drug charges out in Philadelphia, his name, Warren Dixon. Of course, when Sharita's family got the news, this name did not ring a bell. So Wilma decided to go call all of her friends and ask, do you know this guy? It turned out Ashley Mendez started to cry over the phone. Wilma was like, what's going on? She's like, oh my God, we went to high school with him. He sat in between Sharita and I in our English class. Wow. And now Ashley also added that he was a weirdo, that he gave off a really bad vibe, and that they were not friends with him. He was not in their friend group, and they did not hang out. The investigators find out that he's on probation, and that every week he has to meet with his probation officer right next door to the police station. So what do? They decide on one of those meetings, they're going to come in, they're going to pull him aside, and they're going to ask him questions about Sharita's case. And that's exactly what they did. They first ask him if he knows her, and he's completely calm, cooperative, and he admits, yes, I went to high school with Sharita. They asked him if he knew what happened to her, and he said, I found out that she was murdered, and I remember it being in the news at the time. The thing about this man is that they're trying to figure out if he possibly is under the influence of something because they think that he has some sort of mental health condition that he's not able to stay on track. He keeps getting into these tangents about things that don't even make sense, and they're trying to bring things back and keep him talking about Sharita. But he doesn't even seem interested or concerned about her case. So that was very frustrating. And he was there for hours without giving them any concrete information. He was starting to get frustrated because they were asking him if he was ever in contact with her, especially on the night that she went missing. And he's like, how am I supposed to know? That was years ago. We were in class together. I could have seen her in class. I could have bumped into her after school. That was a holiday. I don't know. I could have been in some random hangout with her or some places or shopping together. Now, he was getting upset because he can see they're trying to connect him to something where he's saying it can be explained away. We went to the same high school. But this was before they told him that they had his actual seminal fluid on her pant leg, on her jeans, because that changed everything. This was not about casually bumping into someone at the mall. And that's when the interview started to change. He becomes increasingly angry. He's like, well, I know I didn't kill her. And then he starts to provide information that could possibly explain away items that were found at the actual crime scene, starting with the head covering. He said something to the effect of, I might have ran into her that night. I think she asked to borrow my do-rag. Well, that did not make sense to them. Number one, her family had already identified that that was not her item, and she wouldn't wear an item like that. Especially, this was found around her neck. But the way he was trying to explain it away, he's like, if my hair was in there or something, that would be mine, but I let her borrow it. So it doesn't mean I did anything to her. I know what you're probably thinking, and that's what the detectives were thinking as well. Then they brought up records of where his last address was. He was staying with his father off 32nd Street. This was only a few blocks away from the bridge, the same street that the payphone was on. I'm going to show it to you on a map. And just a block away from where Sharita's boyfriend Greg lived. So this puts this man in the vicinity of where Sharita would have been walking, possibly on a number of nights, when she was walking across that bridge and going over to Greg's house. He probably saw them together. And then when confronted with this, he explained away why his DNA could have been found on her pant leg. Are you ready? He tells them a story that they'd been seeing each other, and they had a consensual contact that night. But again, this doesn't make sense because her underwear were stretched out. They were ripped off of her body. This didn't seem like something that she would have agreed to. And her friends even said, there's no way. Absolutely not. Plus, school records showed right after Thanksgiving break, when Sharita's body had been found, Warren Dixon actually withdrew from school and he never came back and he moved away from the area. Is that a coincidence? They didn't think so. They were pressing and pressing him. And then he started saying things that were very concerning. He started to ask them questions like, okay, if I did somehow kill her, am I responsible if it was an accident? Will I still be in trouble? Would that still be a murder charge? Accident? Now, I think you remember how Sharita was killed. How would that ever be considered an accident? Now, they could not get a confession from this man, but they felt like they could gather enough evidence and put together enough probable cause to get a warrant for his arrest. And they were working on that, but they did have to release him for the time being. It took more time than you would expect. But finally, on February 2nd of 2009, the then 23-year-old was charged with SA and the murder of Sharita Williams. He eventually turned himself in the next night to the police station. This was a form of closure. It's not going to bring relief or peace in any way because there is still so much to come. It's not going to bring Sharita back. Even her best friend Veronica said it lifted a huge weight off of everyone's shoulders, and it's been really difficult to know that he had been out there all that time. It did feel like they were finally able to let Sharita rest in peace. And she even added that she thought about her all the time. And when she gave birth to her first child in November, she actually wore a pair of socks that Sharita had gifted to her and a button with Sharita's picture on it so that she could be there for a big milestone like that in her life. Warren Dixon's history was troubling. He had been arrested on assault and weapons charges in 2003 and again on drug charges in 2005. And now he was in jail and his bail was set at $750,000. When he appeared in court, Sharita's family saw him face to face for the very first time, and they described him as defiant. He was completely uncooperative to the point where he wouldn't even stand when the judge ordered him to. So a bailiff had to actually take their hands underneath his armpits and pull this man into a standing position. Time passed as they awaited a trial, but in March of 2011, Warren Dixon, who was now 25 years old, showed up in court and pleaded guilty to aggravated manslaughter and attempted aggravated sexual assault in the death of Sharita Williams. It had been more than 7 years since her murder, and all he did was simply answer yes or no to most of these questions as part of his confession, except for when they asked how he restrained her. He said, by putting my hands around her arms and neck. He said, yes, he understood that she died from that, and that his actions resulted in her death. Later, he explained what really happened the night that Sharita was murdered. He said he saw her walking towards the 36th Street Bridge on her way home. He came up behind her and attacked her by forcing her under the bridge and tried to force her into sexual acts, but she resisted, which led Warren to put his hands around her neck and choke her. He never went into detail about all of the horrific and gruesome things that he had done to her, only that he ended her life. But we know it can be inferred from the evidence that she was bound, restrained, forced into an act by him pulling down her pants and ripping off her underwear. Then he pulled the jeans back up without even bothering to button them or putting her belt on. Warren Dixon was sentenced to 20 years in prison with eligibility for parole after serving only 85% of his sentence. He waived his right to an appeal, and after the hearing, he was dragged from this courtroom. For those closest to Sharita, the sentence was a bitter pill to swallow. 20 years felt like nothing compared to what had been taken from them. Ariel, one of Sharita's best friends, said, he gets a second chance, and Sharita doesn't. He gets to have a life after he gets out, but she doesn't. There should not be a second chance when you have taken someone else's life. Now, I'm sure a lot of people agree. And if Warren Dixon serves the minimum, he is eligible for parole next year in 2026. Sharita's father, Harry, said he's already made it clear he plans to be at that hearing. He will fight to ensure that this man remains behind bars for as long as possible, for the rest of his life. If he has anything to say about it, Harry will be there. And it's beyond me why a plea deal would ever be accepted, where they don't have to go into detail, they don't get a life sentence. But the way I see it is they probably were going to have a hard time convincing a jury with the lack of evidence. They don't have eyewitnesses, they don't have CCTV footage, no digital evidence, no data that put him in a certain place. Of course, yes, his DNA. But even that, it can be explained away. And if you can't get a conviction, then you have to take a deal. I know there will be people watching that will blame Sharita, and I don't like that. She was 16. I know that we can sit here and say, well, why did she lie? Why did she tell her parents she was going to friends' houses all the time when she was going to a boy's house? Why was she walking alone? Why was she seeing a guy? We can just keep saying why? But that is not what we should be questioning. We should be asking why this monster did what he did. It's his actions that led to her murder. Sharita was just being a teenager. She was excited. She just got her nails done. She was expecting to hang out with her boyfriend. She was not expecting nor doing anything that risky by simply walking down a street in the evening. It wasn't even in the middle of the night. And even if it was, it doesn't excuse the acts of a deranged person, a person who takes what they want and discards a human being. Nothing will justify that. And even her family says they share her story because they hope that other young women will travel in groups. If you go together, leave together, and notice your surroundings. Her father said that Sharita's death is making people aware of what can happen to you. Don't think that it can't. Her loved ones believe that she is saving lives through bringing awareness to her story, that even in death, Sharita is serving the purpose that she once dreamed of. She was meant to do big things, and she is. So take that from this case, if anything. And I want to say that I am so sorry to Sharita's family and loved ones. She was a beautiful, loving person with so much ahead of her in life. And I thank you all for being here for her story. I will see you in my very next video.